Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Mohammed Layiq Sediqi, the father of Holophase. Part 60, Information Theory. Holophase as a universal physical script. Remember the language we are learning. There is one field, phi, the holophase. One continuous cyclic movement from which all of reality unfolds. When phi begins to change, its first derivatives appear, and with them, the three dimensions show themselves at once. Time as omega, space as k, and motion as v, built from both. Every higher derivative is a finer question about how phi changes, and each one casts three shadows together: a time shadow, a space shadow, and a motion shadow. These echoes mix and weave into one another, forming the patterns we call fields, particles, bodies, thoughts, and worlds. In this picture, everything that exists is a living tapestry of phi, endlessly echoing through its derivatives and their dimensional shadows. Today, we listen to just one of those echoes. Our journey through Book 12, the Book of Expert Scrutiny and Legitimacy, has already taken us through demanding gates. We have seen that the holophase behaves like a real language, with an alphabet, grammar, and semantics. We have seen that it has a solid mathematical backbone made of derivatives and jet bundles. We have even faced the hardest question of all. Can this framework be tested and broken by experiment, or is it just a beautiful story? Now we turn to a new domain of expertise, one that touches communication, computation, and knowledge itself. That domain is information theory. This field asks, what is information? How do we measure it? And how does it travel through the world? In this part, we connect that powerful set of ideas with the holophase language. We will see that the derivative tree is not only a way to describe physical behavior, but also a universal physical script in which all information must be written whenever it becomes real in the world. To begin, we need a clear sense of what information theorists mean by the word information. In everyday language, we often mix information with meaning, emotion, or importance. But information theory starts from something much simpler and sharper. In its pure form, information is the resolution of uncertainty. If an event is guaranteed to happen, it carries no new information when it finally occurs because nothing has been learned. If an event could have gone many different ways and one particular outcome appears, the resolution of that uncertainty is what we call information. A simple way to feel this is to think about prediction and surprise. If you are completely sure that the sun will rise tomorrow, watching the sunrise does not really surprise you. The event carries almost no new information for you. On the other hand, if you suddenly see a bright meteor streak across the sky when you were not expecting it, that moment carries a lot of information, because it cuts through a cloud of uncertainty. Information and surprise are deeply linked. The less predictable an outcome was, the more information its arrival brings. From this point of view, a perfectly regular signal, such as a metronome ticking with perfect timing, carries very little information once its pattern is known. Each tick is exactly like the previous one. At the other extreme, pure white noise, in which every value is independent and unpredictable, carries the maximum information per sample, but it is shapeless and hard to use. Most of the interesting information in the universe lives between these extremes, in structured patterns that are partly predictable and partly surprising. They carry enough order to be recognizable and enough variation to say something new. Information theory measures information in bits, where one bit is the amount of information gained when we resolve a simple yes or no question. If we are completely unsure whether a fair coin will land heads or tails, then seeing the result gives us one bit of information. With more possible outcomes and more complex uncertainties, we can have many bits of information. The key idea is always the same. Information is about how much our uncertainty shrinks when reality makes a choice. Now let us turn this lens onto the holophase. The state of a physical system, or even of the entire universe, can be described in principle by the value of the phi field everywhere. Of course, we never have access to such a complete description, and in any case, it would contain an infinite amount of raw data. But we rarely need that infinite detail. What we really need, both as scientists and as living beings, is enough information to predict how the system will behave next, at the level that matters to us. This is where the derivative tree reveals itself as an information structure rather than just a mathematical decoration. Think of the master tree of derivatives as a hierarchical scheme for storing predictive information about phi. At the base, we have the value of phi itself at a point. On its own, that value is like a single still frame of a film. It tells us something, but it does not yet tell us what will happen in the next frame. When we take the first derivatives, the temporal derivative omega and the spatial derivatives collected into k, we learn how phi is changing in time and space at that point. This already reduces uncertainty about what is coming next, because we now know the local trend, the direction in which the field is moving. Taking the second derivatives gives us still more information. We learn how the trend itself is changing. The temporal second derivative, which we call alpha in the Holophase program, tells us whether the ticking rate of reality at that point is speeding up or slowing down. Spatial second derivatives give curvature, telling us whether the field is turning, bending, or flattening out. These pieces of information refine our ability to predict what phi will do in the near future. Each higher level of derivatives adds another layer of nuance, resolving finer and finer uncertainties. In this sense, the full infinite list of derivatives at a point, the jet of the field, is the complete local information packet about the behavior of phi. If we knew this infinite jet exactly, we could, in principle, reconstruct how phi behaves in an infinitesimal region around that point with perfect accuracy. Each derivative is like an additional bit, or more realistically, a bundle of bits, of predictive information. The derivative tree is not just a formal tower. It is a structured hierarchy of information about how the field is poised to evolve. Of course, in practice, we never use or need the whole tree. This leads us directly to the idea of compression, which is central in information theory. Compression is the art of representing data in a shorter form by removing redundancy and ignoring details that do not matter for the task at hand. When you zip a file on your computer, you are compressing information. The underlying trick is to notice patterns and reuse them so that you do not have to store every detail separately. Seen through this lens, the way we use the Holophase tree is a kind of natural compression. Whenever we write down a physical model, we are effectively deciding how high we need to climb in the derivative tree to capture the behavior we care about. If we decide that first derivatives are enough, we are making a very strong compression. We keep only the coarsest predictive features and discard all higher order nuances as irrelevant noise. If we decide we need second or third derivatives, we are keeping more information and compressing less. A simple example is the motion of a car along a road. If we are only mildly interested and the car is driving steadily, we might describe it by saying it is moving at 60 kilometers per hour in this direction. That description uses only a first derivative, the velocity, and ignores acceleration and higher changes. It is a heavily compressed summary, but it may be enough to predict roughly where the car will be after a few seconds. If we are designing a safety system or simulating an emergency braking scenario, we need more detail. We must include acceleration, jerk, and perhaps the limits of tire friction, all of which live higher up in the derivative tree. The more sensitive and long-ranged our predictions need to be, the less we can compress. The same logic applies in more serious physics. Newtonian gravity, which works beautifully for many situations, is a compressed description that uses a certain level of the derivative tree of the gravitational potential. General relativity adds more of the higher order structure of space-time curvature. It is less compressed but more accurate, and it becomes necessary when we work with strong gravitational fields or demand very high precision. In this way, different physical theories can be seen as different compression schemes applied to the same underlying Holophase language. Science, on this view, is the art of finding the right level of compression for the questions we are asking. Now we can state the central claim of this part. Whenever information is physically stored, transmitted, or processed, it must ultimately take the form of a specific pattern in one or more phi fields and their derivatives. Information is never disembodied. It always lives as structure in some physical medium. The holophase language is therefore not just a way to describe physical processes. It is the universal physical script in which all information that truly exists in the world is written. Consider memory, the simplest place where information resides. In a printed book, the information is stored in the spatial arrangement of dark and light regions on a page. At a physical level, those regions are differences in how the surface reflects and absorbs light. There are patterns in an optical phi field, written in the arrangement of pigment molecules and fibers. In a hard drive, information is stored in the orientation of tiny magnetic domains. That pattern is a particular configuration of a magnetic phi field and its spatial derivatives at the nanometer scale. In DNA, the genetic information of an organism is stored in the order of nucleotide bases along a molecule. That order is a pattern in a molecular field, a specific sequence of atoms in space. In each case, the information is a recognizable difference in the phi pattern, stable enough to be read later. The particular details of the medium differ, but the underlying language is the same. There is a field defined in space and time. Its value and derivatives take on a structured pattern that can be reliably reproduced, transported, and interpreted by another system. Whether we call it ink, magnetization, or genetic sequence, it is always a holophase script at the physical level. The same is true for signal transmission. A radio station sends music to your car by modulating an electromagnetic field. In amplitude modulation, the station varies the strength of the field over time, encoding the sound wave in the amplitude. In frequency modulation, the station varies the frequency, that is, the temporal derivative omega of the field. In digital communication, the station flips the field between discrete patterns that represent ones and zeros. In all cases, the information is a carefully shaped braid of temporal and spatial derivatives of the electromagnetic phi field as it moves through space. A nerve impulse in your brain is another famous example of a signal. Here, the phi field is the electrical potential across a neuron's membrane, combined with concentration fields for different ions. A spike of activity is a traveling wave of change in that potential, a pulse of temporal and spatial derivatives that runs along the nerve fiber. The information it carries is represented in the timing of the spikes, their pattern, and their routing through the network. Again, the signal is a moving pattern in phi, and everything that matters about the information can be described in terms of the derivatives of that pattern. Even computation, the heart of digital information processing, is ultimately a holophase process. A classical transistor, the core element of modern computers, is simply a tiny device that controls whether current flows through a channel based on the voltage at a gate. That voltage is a local value of an electrical phi field. When it crosses a threshold, it changes the flow of electrons, altering the pattern of the field elsewhere. Logic gates, from which all algorithms are built, are networks of such devices, laid out in space so that field patterns interact according to specific constraint chains. The abstract operations of addition, comparison, or encryption are realized as cascades of changes in derivative patterns through silicon. Your own brain is a biological computer, built not from silicon, but from neurons and glial cells. Thoughts, memories, and decisions correspond to large-scale patterns of electrical and chemical activity in neural tissue. From the holophase perspective, each pattern is a sentence in the language of phi, written across billions of tiny oscillators and gradients. When you remember a face or understand the word, what is happening at the deepest physical level is that one intricate holophase braid is being reactivated and reshaped into another. Putting all of this together, we can say that the holophase language plays the role of the lowest level alphabet and grammar of physical instantiation. Human languages, mathematical notations, programming languages, and symbolic codes like the genetic code live higher up. They are ways of organizing information in the abstract, but for that information to become real and causal, it must be expressed in a medium. That expression always takes the form of a pattern in phi and its derivatives. The holophase is, in this sense, the machine code of reality's hardware. This perspective also clarifies how abstract information becomes concrete. When we say there is a message, a memory, or a program, we are really talking about a set of possible physical patterns in phi that could realize that message. To actually realize it, we must choose one of those patterns and let the world adopt it. Writing text to a screen means driving particular pixels into particular states. Storing a file means aligning tiny magnetic domains or charging tiny capacitors. Sending a signal means choosing a sequence of field modulations. In every case, a high-level description is being mapped down into a specific allowed braid in the Holophase derivative tree. Notice that information is never purely temporal, purely spatial, or purely motional. Each real instance of information lives as an interwoven triad. Take a simple spoken word. At the abstract level, it has letters and meaning. At the physical level, it is a pressure wave in air. There is a temporal echo, the way the pressure rises and falls at your eardrum as time passes. There is a spatial echo, the pattern of compressed and rarefied regions moving through space. There is a motion echo, the speed and direction with which the wavefront travels. The information of the word is tied to the way these three aspects cohere. Change the timing, spacing, or propagation too much, and the word becomes noise. The holophase braid that carries the information must be coherent across all three dimensions. This connection to information theory also offers new ways to falsify or refine the holophase framework. Known results from information theory, such as limits on channel capacity or energy costs of erasing information, are ultimately statements about what kinds of holophase patterns are possible. The famous limit on how much information can be sent through a noisy channel, for example, depends on the bandwidth available and the ratio of signal power to noise power. In holophase terms, bandwidth is a statement about which omegas and k's are allowed to propagate, and noise is a statement about uncontrollable fluctuations in the field's derivatives. A successful holophase model of a real communication channel should reproduce these limits. If it predicted that we could send unlimited information through a narrow band with fixed noise and energy, it would contradict both experiment and information theory. Another deep information theoretical result is Landauer's principle, which states that erasing one bit of information in a system at a given temperature has a minimum energetic cost. Holophase translates this into a statement about what it takes to drive a phi pattern from a range of possible states into a single standard state. Doing so means squeezing away uncertainty and therefore reducing the number of accessible micropatterns in the field. That reduction corresponds to a drop in entropy and a necessary release of energy into the surroundings. If the holophase framework allowed a physical gate to erase information without any such energetic cost at non-zero temperature, it would be in conflict with this well-tested principle. This connection suggests that algorithmic complexity, another key idea in information theory, also has a natural expression in holophase terms. The algorithmic complexity of a pattern is the length of the shortest program that can generate it. Simple regular patterns have low complexity, whereas random ones have high complexity. In the holophase view, simple patterns correspond to solutions of relatively simple constraint chains, often involving low-order derivatives and simple symmetries. Random or turbulent patterns require more complicated chains, higher-order derivatives, and sensitive dependence on initial conditions. If we found that a very simple and orderly physical pattern required an extremely complicated holophase description, or that a wildly irregular one could be generated by an almost trivial derivative rule, we would need to rethink the mapping between physical and informational complexity. There is another useful lens from information theory that dovetails naturally with the holophase picture, and that is the idea of entropy as a measure of uncertainty in a probability distribution. When information theorists talk about the entropy of a source, they are talking about how unpredictable its outputs are on average. In holophase terms, we can think about the entropy of a physical system as a measure of how many different phi patterns are compatible with the macroscopic facts we know. A high entropy state corresponds to a large region in the space of possible holophase configurations, while a low entropy state corresponds to a small region. This view lets us reinterpret familiar thermodynamic ideas in the language of patterns and scripts. When a gas expands into a larger volume, its entropy increases because there are many more ways for the molecules, and thus the underlying phi fields, to arrange themselves while still satisfying the coarse facts about energy and particle number. The script becomes less specific. The message about microstructure becomes shorter. When we cool a material and it crystallizes, the entropy drops because the allowed configurations shrink to a narrow set of highly ordered patterns. The holophase script becomes more constrained, and the information needed to specify the exact state, if we care about microscopic detail, goes up. From this angle, life itself can be seen as a remarkable strategy for locally writing and preserving low entropy, high structure holophase patterns in the middle of a universe that, on the whole, tends toward higher entropy. Living systems feed on free energy to maintain and replicate intricate arrangements of phi, from molecules to tissues to ecosystems. They build nested memories, control loops, and communication channels out of holophase braids, constantly exporting entropy to their surroundings in order to hold their own informational shape. The holophase language is broad enough to describe both the noisy background and the intricate living foreground with the same basic alphabet of derivatives. At this stage in the journey, you can begin to train your own intuition to see information as holophase structure. Look at a traffic light. The red, amber, and green phases are signals that guide behavior. At a physical level, there are different states of light-emitting devices, each one a specific pattern in an electromagnetic field. Look at a fingerprint on your phone screen. It is a unique spatial pattern of ridges and oils that a sensor reads by sampling tiny variations in electrical or optical phi fields. Look at a digital photograph. It is a grid of pixels, each one storing a number, but in the physical device, those numbers are charge levels, magnetic states, or trapped electrons. In all of these examples, the thing you call information is a carefully constrained difference in how phi is arranged and how its derivatives behave. The same is true in more diffuse systems. Tree rings store a record of growth conditions in the varying width and density of the wood, which reflect patterns in water and nutrient flows over years. Ice cores store information about past climates in the composition of trapped bubbles and isotopes, which reflect long-forgotten holophase processes in atmosphere and ocean. Your own body carries deep information about your life in the strengths of particular synaptic connections, the structure of your muscles, and the chemistry of your immune cells. We return, finally, to phi itself. Seen through the lens of information theory, phi is not just a field that moves and oscillates. It is the substrate in which all real information is written. Information is not something that floats above physics. It is a name we give to certain structured, stable, and meaningful patterns in the holophase. When we say that the universe processes information, we are saying that phi evolves through a sequence of derivative-governed states that carry, transform, and sometimes preserve specific patterns. The computation is the dynamics. The information is the structured state along that dynamic path. As we integrate this view, we can see how far our climb has taken us. The holophase language began as a way to talk about the unity of time, space, and motion. It became a full mathematical framework of derivatives and jets. It passed through the gate of falsifiability. Now, by meeting information theory, it reveals itself as the universal physical script for memory, communication, and computation. This means that the holophase program is not just a new way to write equations. It is a candidate for the underlying alphabet of every physical message that has ever been written in the universe. We close this part with an image. Imagine the universe as a vast fabric, endlessly woven and rewoven. Each thread is a local piece of the phi field, and each pattern in the cloth is a physical process or structure. The bright motifs are the information-rich regions, where phi's pattern is highly structured and meaningful for some observer or system. The dimmer regions are the simpler or noisier areas. The holophase language is the loom on which this fabric is woven. Information theory is the mathematics we use to measure the richness of the patterns. When you look at the world with this in mind, everything changes slightly. A whisper is no longer just moving air. It is a carefully shaped holophase pattern, carrying bits from one mind to another. A line of code is not just text on a screen. It is an instruction to arrange phi in silicon so that it performs a particular transformation. A memory of your childhood is not just a feeling. It is a delicate, persistent braid in neural fields, reinforced over years, surviving because it fits into the constraints of biophysics and information flow. You are not just living in a universe of things and forces. You are living in a universe of messages, written, erased, and rewritten every moment in the script of Phi. The Holophase framework invites you to see yourself as both an author and a reader in this universal text. Every action you take writes a new pattern into the world. Every perception you have is a decoding of patterns already written. Salam and peace be upon you.